What if everything you've been told about the origins of humankind was only half the truth? What if the Genesis story you heard in Sunday school was just the surface layer, carefully constructed to reveal only what you were ready to hear, while the deeper truth stayed buried in plain sight? There's a question most believers and even many theologians avoid asking out loud. Did God create not just one, but two entirely different types of humans? And if so, what does that mean for who we are and who we were meant to become? In the beginning, Genesis opens with a profound declaration. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But just a few verses later, the creation of man is described, not once but twice. First in Genesis 1:26-27, it says, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Male and female he created them." Then again in Genesis 2:7, we're told, "Then the Lord God formed man of dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life." 2 moments. 2 accounts. 2 creations? Could this repetition be a simple stylistic choice? Or is it a hidden clue to a much older, much stranger truth? Scholars have debated this for centuries. But what if the answer was never meant to be explained by tradition, but revealed through awakening? The first humans of Genesis 1 appear to be created as a group, both male and female, made in the image of God, instructed to multiply and fill the earth. There's a sense of divine equality, a collective blessing. But in Genesis 2, the tone shifts. God forms Adam individually, then creates Eve from his rib. Suddenly, hierarchy enters the story. Submission is implied. The earth, which was once merely a home, becomes a testing ground. So who were the first humans, really? Some ancient Jewish mystics believed the Genesis 1 humans were spiritual beings, closer to divine archetypes, humanity in its purest, most sacred form. Others suggest they were a different race altogether, one designed to steward the planet before the fall of man even began. In contrast, the Genesis 2 human, Adam, was vulnerable, incomplete without Eve and eventually expelled from paradise. It's as if Genesis 1 speaks of beings of light, while Genesis 2 introduces beings of clay, spirit and matter, divine image versus earthly limitation. Could this be why the world today feels torn between two identities? One that reaches upward, toward divinity, creativity, compassion, and another that clings to fear, control, and survival. Maybe these aren't just psychological instincts. Maybe they're remnants of our dual origin. 2 types of humans, one born of light, one of dust. One awakened to God's image, the other struggling to remember it. This theory isn't just speculation. It's echoed in cultures across time. The Sumerians spoke of the Anunnaki creating humans in stages. Gnostics taught that a false god, the demiurge, crafted a physical world to trap spiritual beings. Even in Christian mysticism, there's the idea of a divine spark buried deep within the human soul, waiting to be reawakened. Could this hidden spark be the Genesis 1 version of us, buried under the clay of Genesis 2? Look around the world. Some people seem driven by an invisible purpose, creating beauty, healing others, searching for truth. Others seem bound by a hunger for power, repeating cycles of violence and fear. What if the difference isn't just upbringing or biology, but origin? Could it be that the war between good and evil is also a war between 2 human lineages, one remembering Eden, the other surviving exile? This dual creation idea also sheds light on a puzzling aspect of the Bible, Cain's wife. If Adam and Eve were the first and only humans, where did Cain find a wife after being exiled? Who were the others he feared would harm him? These questions are often dismissed or explained away, but they hint at a much deeper reality. That other humans, those not descended from Adam, already existed. Beings made in God's image, yes, but not part of Adam's bloodline. Not part of the fall, not part of the curse. If that's true, then humanity didn't just fall once. There was a split, a divergence, between those who retained the memory of divine origin and those who became fully immersed in the material world. And the entire biblical narrative, from Abraham to Christ, could be seen as a rescue mission, not to save all humans from sin, but to reunite the 2 types, to bring the spirit and the body back into harmony. Jesus himself may have hinted at this when he told Nicodemus, "You must be born again." Not simply forgiven, but reformed, recreated, reconnected to the image from which we first came. The kingdom of God, he said, is within us, not outside. Not in the temple, not in ritual, but within. Could he have been speaking to the Genesis 2 humans, reminding them of their Genesis 1 essence? The more we look, the more we see the fingerprints of a deeper design. The parables of the wheat and the tares, the sheep and the goats, the wise and foolish virgins, stories not of good versus evil, but of two kinds, two natures, two sources, one aligned with eternity, one entangled in time. And yet the message isn't despair, it's invitation. If there truly are two types of humans, we are not doomed to division. In fact, the entire spiritual journey could be understood as the process of integration, awakening the divine image within, letting the breath of God stir the clay to life once again. The mystery of Genesis is not just about origins, it's about destiny. It whispers that you were never meant to stay in exile. You were meant to remember. The serpent's temptation in Eden was to become like God, but the tragedy is, we already were, created in His image, infused with His essence. But the moment we chose knowledge over presence, judgment over intimacy, we forgot who we were. And so the journey began, not to become divine, but to remember that we already are. That we came from light before we touched dust. If you've ever felt like you didn't belong in this world, like something in you knows a higher truth, even if you can't explain it, maybe it's because the Genesis 1 version of you is waking up, the one that was created to walk with God in the cool of the day, the one not born of fear but of love, not cursed but blessed, not fallen but rising. Maybe that's the secret Genesis has been hiding in plain sight. Not just a record of creation, but a mirror, reflecting who we really are, and who we were always meant to be. But how does one awaken the part of themselves made in the image of God? It doesn't happen by accident. It begins when you stop identifying solely with the flesh, with the impulses, fears, and distractions of the material world, and start listening to the faint echo within. That whisper is older than your name, older than your body. It's the voice that reminds you that you are more than survival, more than ambition, more than the roles you play. It's the Genesis 1 human inside the Genesis 2 shell, calling you home. This divine image doesn't demand perfection. It requires remembrance. The greatest deception wasn't simply the fruit in Eden. It was the lie that we are separated from God. The moment you believe you are just flesh, just dust, just a product of time and biology, you forget your true origin. And in that forgetting, you live small. You react instead of create. You chase instead of become. But when you begin to remember, even just a little, something extraordinary stirs. Compassion for others, hunger for truth, and a deep inner ache that nothing in this world seems to satisfy. That ache is not a flaw. It is evidence. Proof that you were designed for something more. If we were only Genesis, two beings formed from dust and destined to return to it, there would be no longing in us for eternity, for transcendence, for beauty that outlives death. But because we also carry the echo of Genesis 1, because the breath of God is still in our lungs, we long for home even when we don't know where home is. This may explain why some people seek spiritual awakening as if their life depends on it. Because at a soul level, it does. You can possess everything the world offers and still feel empty. Because nothing material can feed what is eternal. The Genesis 1 human in you hungers not for gold or glory, but for reunion with God, with truth, with your undistorted self. And yet the dust is not evil. God formed Adam from the ground. Dust was always part of the design, but it was never meant to lead. The tragedy began when dust tried to define spirit, when the vessel forgot the voice. The fall of humanity wasn't just about sin. It was about misalignment. The clay stood above the breath, and everything fractured. But what was once broken can be realigned. Every act of love, of truth, of surrender to what is holy, these are the movements of spirit remembering itself. And through that remembrance, we begin to recreate the Eden we lost. Not as a place on a map, but as a condition of the soul. A return to walking with God, not just in a garden, but in every moment. That is what Jesus came to restore, not religion, but relationship. Not law, but life. The Genesis 1 life, reawakened in a Genesis 2 world. This dual human theory also reframes how we view human potential. What if miracles aren't violations of nature, but expressions of original design? If we were made in the image of God, then maybe healing, prophecy, and profound intuition aren't supernatural. They're natural to the part of us that has remembered. They feel rare not because they are impossible, but because most have forgotten how to see through the eyes of the first creation. And maybe this is why darkness works so hard to keep us asleep, not through terror, but through distraction. If it can't corrupt your spirit, it will numb your awareness. It will flood your life with noise, urgency, division, anything to keep you from hearing that still, small voice inside, the voice that says, "You were made for more." You are not just from earth, you carry the echo of heaven. You see, Genesis isn't merely history, it's identity. And once you understand that, everything shifts. You no longer see other people as enemies or competitors, but as fellow exiles, some remembering, some still asleep, all aching for home. The division in the world is just a reflection of the division within. The real battlefield isn't between nations or ideologies. It's between the two selves inside every human, the one that knows its divine origin, and the one that clings to the dust. Every choice, every thought, every act of love or fear is a vote for which self you will become. This is why the message of Genesis matters now more than ever. In a world addicted to division, to surface identities, to transient fame, the ancient truth quietly endures. You were created in the image of something infinite, not as an accident, not as an afterthought, but with intention, purpose, and power. The darkness knows this. That's why it invests so much in keeping you small. The moment you remember who you truly are, everything it built begins to crumble, and so it distracts you with noise, seduces you with speed, numbs you with comfort. But beneath all of it, there is still that quiet pull, a whisper that speaks when the world goes silent. That whisper is the memory of your beginning, a memory older than culture, deeper than trauma, untouched by the labels you've carried. That whisper is the first breath, the light within the clay, the Genesis 1 imprint that still pulses underneath every heartbeat. There are some who carry more of that light, people who shine not with charisma, but with truth. They walk differently. They forgive when it doesn't make sense. They love without a reason. They speak as if they've seen something others haven't, and perhaps they have. Maybe they're not better. Maybe they're just awake. Maybe they've listened to the voice long enough to follow it home. But this isn't about comparing yourself to others. This is about waking up to yourself, to your origin, to your purpose. Because the greatest tragedy isn't living as dust. It's never realizing you were more. The story of the Bible is not just a fall, it's a return. From garden to exile to redemption. And every generation must choose whether to continue the sleep or begin the return. This return doesn't require perfection. It requires presence, a willingness to look beyond the noise and ask, who am I really? Not the name you were given, the job you do, the mask you wear, but the essence beneath it all. The part of you that existed before fear entered the world, the part that still feels wonder, the part that aches for God, even when you don't know why. And once you begin that journey, you start to see others differently. Not as competition, not as strangers, but as reflections, some clear, some cracked, but all carrying a piece of the same mystery. Even those who seem lost, even those who act from darkness, perhaps especially them. Because the deeper the exile, the more powerful the return. This is why Christ didn't come only for the righteous. He came to awaken the forgotten, to stir the breath of God in those who thought they were only dust, to call out the image beneath the scars, to say, even now, even here, you are still mine. You are not your shame. You are not your failure. You are not your exile. You are my image covered in clay. And I came not to condemn the clay, but to reveal the light. So maybe the Genesis mystery isn't hidden at all. Maybe it's waiting in plain sight for eyes willing to see, ears ready to hear, and hearts bold enough to remember. Not remember with the mind, but with the soul. Because the truth doesn't need to be invented. It only needs to be recalled. In the end, maybe there weren't just two types of humans created. Maybe there are two types living inside each of us. And the greatest question you'll ever answer is simple. Which one will you become?